A nome del Comitato di Festival Letteratura ringraziamo il gruppo TEA per aver contribuito alla realizzazione di questo evento. A mettere l'accento al posto giusto, Luca Pareschi.
Buon pomeriggio, ben ritrovati per questo primo accento di oggi pomeriggio. Vi ricordo che l'accento sarà tenuto in lingua inglese senza traduzione, quindi faccio la presentazione prima in italiano, poi in inglese. Nell'ultima mezz'ora William Dalrymple stava bloccato nel traffico cercando di raggiungere la tenda accenti in tempo per questo evento. E invece nella prossima mezz'ora ci racconterà della storia di quello che a lungo è stato il diamante più grande del mondo e di come attraverso i secoli una serie di storie di vicende importanti abbiano circonfuso d'aura questo diamante. So, half an hour ago William Dalrymple was still in a traffic jam trying to reach the Tenda Sordello to begin this event. Whereas in the next 30 minutes, he will tell us the story of a diamond, which for long was the biggest known diamond existing, and all of the legends and events surrounding this diamond. So, William, the floor is yours. Please come here. And the accento by William Dalrymple starts now.
Very good. Next summer, there will be a coronation in Westminster Abbey. And the Queen Consort, as she now is, Camilla, will put on her head a crown. And on that crown will be this diamond that you can see on the screens in front of you. This is not an uncontroversial object, it's fair to say. In fact, I can't think of any other object in history which has been more fought over which more murders have taken place, over which more blood has been shed. Any of you who are Tolkien fans will know about the Ring of Power in Lord of the Rings, which somehow has this sort of magical effect of turning sane men into monsters and turning peaceful people into bloodthirsty creatures because people want this ring so much. The Kohinoor is in many ways the true life version of the Ring of Power of Tolkien. It is an object which in recent history has almost never passed peacefully from one owner to another. Indeed, there are many legends associated with this diamond which associate this ring with incredible bad luck, with a curse. There are different versions of this legend. In some versions, anyone who wears it, who is not a person of extreme good virtue and saintliness, will die. In other versions, it's just men, and women are okay. But either way, there is, in real life, in its actual history, not in legend, an extraordinary story of greed, bloodshed, and murder to attain this ring. And more importantly, and away from the stuff of Gothic novels and Indiana Jones and Tolkien, this diamond bears the weight of all the issues of colonialism, all the anger and fury about the way that the West, over the last 300 years, has taken goods from other countries. I mean, obviously, history is full of theft and loot. You go to Venice, where I've just come from Venice this morning. You can't walk any street in Venice without seeing some plaque stolen from Constantinople or stolen from the Adriatic. Or this has happened throughout history. Go to Constantinople, things are stolen from Rome. It isn't something that was invented in 18th century England, the idea of looting defeated opponents. But the scale of the suffering, genocide, and massacres caused by the West, by colonialism in the last 300 years, is on a different scale to that produced by previous generations. And in many ways, this small diamond, which now is only the size of an egg, although as we will hear, it was once much bigger, this small diamond represents all that. And so when the Queen died, the Queen of England died 4 days ago, in Britain, the whole country went into mourning and saw her a symbol of goodness, duty, service, and all those sorts of words. But in India and in many colonial countries, people saw this as the Queen as a symbol of genocide, looting, pillage, and murder. I found myself in a very odd position because I live in India and I have written for 20 years about loot, genocide, and the massacres of colonialism. And yet, brought up in Britain, I'm used to seeing the Queen on my stamp every time I put a stamp on an envelope, every time I take a coin out of my pocket and put it into a parking meter, every time I take a banknote out of my wallet, there is the Queen. She's part of my life. So when she disappears, I feel a sense of mourning. And yet I understand also the anger felt in Kenya, in India, and in other countries that have suffered under British colonialism. So let me gallop through the history of this diamond and bring you back to where we are today. But just to jump forward, today it's not just India that wants the diamond back, but also Persia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. And until recently, the fifth was the Taliban. Now the Taliban are Afghanistan, so it's back down to 4. but it's a measure of, when my co-author Anita Anand and I went on a BBC Facebook chat about the Kohinoor, it was the media equivalent of the Third World War breaking out. First of all, the Indians came in and said, give it back to us, it's us. The Pakistanis said, no, it used to be in Lahore. The Afghans said it used to be in Kabul. The Iranians said it was in Tehran. And I suspect in realpolitik that this will be the thing that stops the British, will allow the British not to give it back, because they can claim, rightly, who do they give it back to? But one thing is clear, just to go at the beginning of the story, this is an Indian diamond. It begins its life in India. It's easy to state that because all the world's diamonds, before the discovery of the New World mines in Brazil in the 18th century, all the world's diamonds began in India. Surprisingly, Indian diamonds were not mined. They were, rather like when you see movies of the American gold prospectors sieving for gold in Lake, that's where diamonds come. They're in the alluvial deltas of the Godavari, particularly in the south, near Hyderabad, southeast India. And if you sieve the soils of these, the sands of these rivers, you can often find tiny microscopic fragments of diamond. Occasionally, you might find a small natural diamond, which incidentally, in the wild appears like a pillar. It's a small, like a pencil. Octagonal crystal, but very occasionally there is a freak of geology and you get an enormous diamond like the Kohinoor. The Kohinoor is not unique. There are many diamonds in history as big as this. But because of colonialism and because of the history you will hear in the next 20 minutes, it has become the focus of mythology, and it is now known to be the largest diamond in the world. In fact, it's not. There are, I think, at least 100 diamonds now bigger than them, because the diamond mines in South Africa regularly produce mega diamonds. And when you go and see the Kohinoor now in the Tower of London, it's quite comic because it's the size of an egg. It's sitting there, this famous diamond, but it's surrounded by much larger diamonds, particularly the Cullinan diamond, which is the size of a rugby ball, nearly a football, which was found in South Africa. And because it causes so much emotion, the people that run the Tower of London have put, like an airport, a running conveyor belt so that you pass by. And what you see is Indians running backwards on the conveyor belt, shouting, chor, chor, thief, thief, but often at the wrong diamond because they think it's the Cullinan diamond, which is the big one on top. And the Kohinoor is actually a very modest diamond. And as I say, there are at least 100 diamonds today which are bigger than the Kohinoor, but that does not stop the Kohinoor being the most desired diamond in the world because of its history and because of the mythology associated with it. Now, in ancient India, diamonds were a big export. Very early on, people learnt that diamonds were the best cutting tools. And they were exported to China. They were probably exported to ancient Egypt. And some people believe the pyramids were cut with the age of diamond-tipped cutting tools. They enter Indian mythology early. And this is the story of the Bhagavad Puran. And you can see a man holding a gem. And this is the Sayamantika gem, which is the legendary gem associated with Krishna. But this is the first gem in history to have a curse associated with it. And all these stories that we have later in Victorian mythology, like the Moonstone or Indiana Jones, where cursed diamonds enter the story, this begins here in the Bhagavad Puran, which was probably written down about 300 AD. Just as the Roman Empire was collapsing, this story is first written down. And it's a story of a diamond which brings havoc in its weight. It's originally the diamond of the sun god Surya. It's brought down to earth, and as you can see in this picture, someone is being killed for it in the bottom register, and all the women are crying in the top register because their husband has been murdered for this gem. And it's a long and involved story, but Krishna, the god Krishna, is framed with the murder. People say that he is the one that has stolen the diamond, and he has to go through, rather like the story of Jason and the Argonauts or Hercules, he has to go through a series of trials to prove that he's innocent. And in ancient India, diamonds and gems were incredibly important in court ranking. Often people would wear nothing but gems. This is an example of a celestial dancer from the 12th century. And you can see she's covered with gemstones and nothing much else. She's wearing more gems than clothes. But you get then a second wave of interest in gems when the Mughals come from Central Asia with the person of Babur and Humayun here in the 16th century. Just, I suppose, as the Holy Roman Emperor is sacking Rome when Michelangelo is doing the Last Judgment in Rome, the Mughals arrive from Central Asia and they take over India. And they have a huge fascination for gems, but different gems to the ones that the Hindus liked. The Hindus prize diamonds most of all, but you have to be a good person. And they believe that if you have a diamond that is flawed in any way, it can bring enormous bad luck. So it's like a two-edged sword. If you're a good person and it's a good diamond, it's the best thing you can have. But if you're an evil man, or the diamond is flawed and has a flaw somewhere in its structure, it can bring enormous bad luck. And of course, in reality, we know that diamonds throughout history have, of course, brought bad luck. If you're carrying a diamond today, even in the streets of Mantova, and someone sees it late at night, you become a target, obviously, for robbers or anyone that is hard up. Naturally, one understands this is the quickest way of making money ever invented. You just knock someone on the head, take their diamonds, and you're rich. So you can understand where these legends came from. But for the Mughals, they liked red stones of light, Badakhshan rubies. And so there's a slightly different hierarchy of gems for the Mughals. But they are obsessed with them. And in pictures of the Mughal emperors, you find them talking about gems, and in their letters and in their chronicles, they're constantly finding ways. And they invent a ceremony at Nowruz, the New Year ceremony on the 21st of March. The Emperor Jahangir invents a ceremony whereby every noble has to give him a gem. And basically it's the way to advancement in court. If you find a really good gem and give it to the emperor, you'll become governor of Bihar. or something like this. I mean, in a sense, the same happens in Italy today in a different way, and in many other countries. But this is a public and open expression of that. Here is Shah Jahan, the man who built the Taj Mahal. And again, he was prized for his understanding and love of gems. There's a very good story told by one of the Jesuit friars who come up from Goa. And he describes being let in to see a Mogul feast in a palace. And the most beautiful dancing girls in the world are brought in, says the friar. Incredible, lascivious dances, beautiful moves. But Shah Jahan does not look up because he's just been given a bag of diamonds. And he misses all these Aishwarya Rais and Bollywood actresses passing by because he's obsessed with the diamonds he's just been given. And eventually, Shah Jahan decides to move the whole of the Mogul diamond collection into something he can actually use politically. So he builds this, which is the Peacock Throne, one of the most famous objects in history, probably the most valuable piece of furniture ever made. And he basically builds what I suppose we would call a kiosk. It isn't a throne in the Western sense because it's got a roof. But he builds a throne, a covered baldachin, and it represents the Quranic description of the throne of Solomon, and it is covered with the greatest gems from the Mogul collection. And the greatest of all are at the top. And if you look at the top of this slide, there are two peacocks, after which this is known as the Peacock Throne. And the heads of the peacocks are enormous diamonds, and one of those is the Kohinoor. So this is the first strictly historical appearance of the Kohinoor in history, though we know many reports of giant diamonds that people subsequently have said must be the Kohinoor. In fact, it seems, historically speaking, that there were many great diamonds in Indian history. They've ended up in many places. The other great one is the Orlov diamond, now in the Kremlin, which has its own history of a curse, and many people lose their lives over that one. That's sitting in the Kremlin with Mr. Putin today. And that may well have been the other diamond head on the Peacock Throne. Anyway, the Mughal Empire goes from, at its peak, it controls India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and a bit of Persia. But from the 18th century onwards, it collapses. And the last of the emperor, Muhammad Shah Rangila, is the king when this character turns up. This is Nader Shah, the Shah of Persia. And he has nothing against the Mughals. He doesn't want to conquer them, but he needs cash to fight his real enemies, who are the Russians and the Turks. So he decides to go into India on a looting expedition to, as he puts it in one of source, pluck some golden feathers from the Mogul peacock's tail. And so he goes into Kabul. And initially, maybe he only thought of looting Kabul. But there's no resistance, so he goes and loots Peshawar, now in Pakistan. Then he carries on and loots Lahore. And finally, he heads for Delhi, where all the wealth from the Mughals gathered over 200 years. He can't resist. And he's seen pathetic resistance from the Mughal troops. This is 1739. And finally, he defeats the Mughals. There's 1.5 million men in the Mughal camp, but most of them are dancing girls and musicians, and they haven't fought a proper war for a while. Then they've got backward military technology. Nadir Shah has the latest technology. It's called a swivel gun, and it has armor-piercing bullets. It's a huge, like a mini cannon that can be put on the horse with the aid of a tripod that he invents. And with this weaponry, he defeats the Mughal army. He then invites the Mughal Emperor Muhammad Shah to dinner. The guy we saw in this slide, this is the Mughal Emperor in the middle. Here he is in defeat. There's Nadir Shah on the right, and there's the Mughal Emperor on the left. And the idiot accepts the invitation for dinner and then is arrested after dinner. And Nadir Shah drives him into his own capital on his own elephant, all the time maintaining exquisite courtesy. There is no expression of conquest or humiliation. And then he tells Nadir Shah, after there's been a riot and some of his soldiers have been killed, we need compensation. So he sets an impossible figure, a huge sum of diamonds and loot. And 6 weeks later, he leaves Delhi with 8,000 wagons filled with all the jewels, all the gold, everything the Moguls have gathered over 200 years from across the region. And this one action breaks the Mughal Empire. This enormous empire breaks into 1,000 pieces because there's no money to pay the civil servants, there's no money to pay the troops. And in the aftermath, this whole succession of sackings of India, Nadir Shah is assassinated, and this man, Ahmad Shah Abdali, takes the diamond on the night of Nadir Shah's assassination. And he rides off to Kandahar, where he founds the state of Afghanistan, using the Kohinoor diamond as the collateral to borrow money from bankers. So you can say with great reality that the modern Afghan state is founded on the money represented by the Kohinoor. Which is why last year when the Taliban captured Afghanistan, in the pictures of them sitting in Ashraf Ghani's office, behind the desk of the president was a picture of the scene when Ahmad Shah Abdali takes the Kohinoor and is given and opens a new era and declares the Afghan nation born. So this is still very current, not just in Britain, not just in India, but in Persia and Afghanistan. So it passes from Ahmad Shah Abdali. Ahmad Shah Abdali, again, seems to be, just like Nadir Shah was assassinated after he took the diamond, this curse continues to roll in. Muhammad Shah Rangila had it, he loses his empire. Nadir Shah takes it, he's assassinated. Ahmad Shah takes it from him, and he gets a terrible cancerous growth on his face, and his face begins to suppurate, and maggots drop out from it, and he covers it with a gold sheath studded with diamonds, but eventually it eats up his face. So the horrible story. But the diamond passes on to his son, then his grandson, this man, Shah Shuja, who is not Gimli, the dwarf from Lord of the Rings, although he looks like it, but he is Shah Shuja al-Mulk. He loses the diamond and his kingdom within 5 years. And before, actually his brother loses it. His brother loses it and is blinded. And the brother hides the Kohinoor and an equally large ruby in a crack in the wall in his prison cell. So when Shah Shuja comes to power, the first thing he does is to send messengers out to look for these two great gems which had been lost the night his brother was arrested. And they find the red stone, the ruby, under some student has found it when he's out washing. Somehow it had been stolen from the prison cell and ended up hidden under a stone in a river. The student finds it. Shah Shuja takes it back. Even more remarkably, the Kohinoor has been sitting for 30 years being used as a paperweight by a mullah who doesn't know what it is, and it's just keeping his sermons from flying away. So the Kohinoor, this incredibly valuable diamond, was literally being used as a paperweight for 30 years. But anyway, they get both stones back, but again the curse of the Kohinoor runs and Shah Shuja is overthrown, and eventually, to cut a long story short because we're running out of time, it ends up in the hands of the new Sikh king of Lahore, Ranjit Singh. And Ranjit Singh tortures Shah Shuja's son in front of him until he tells him the hiding place of this diamond. So again, more violence, more horrors. Ranjit Singh uses the diamond, the Kohinoor, when he founds the Great Kingdom. Whenever you see Sikhs, these guys with the turbans and the beards, anywhere in the world, their great hero is Ranjit Singh, the Prince of Lahore, the King of the Punjab. And he uses ex-Napoleonic generals, including several Italian generals who had worked for Napoleon. In retirement, they go off to the Punjab and they create an army which can take on the British East India Company. Because meanwhile, while all this killing and mayhem has been going on in Afghanistan and Iran, a British corporation, not even the British country, not the state, but a corporation, the East India Company, which runs from one office in London, has been using loans from Indian bankers and employing Indian mercenaries to build itself an empire, which astonishingly eats up more and more of India until by 1799, a corporation now owns most of the land which had been used by the Mogul Empire. I mean, it's like the movie Avatar. It's the worst thing you can imagine, being conquered not by a country, which is bad enough, but being conquered by a corporation that exists to make a profit. So Ranjit Singh employs Paolo Avitabili, who's from Verona, and several other Italians and Frenchmen, ex-Napoleonic generals, to build an army to take on the East India Company. And he wears the Kohinoor on his arm, very proudly. So the Kohinoor now has been taken down from the Peacock Throne. It's being worn as what's called a bazuband, not as a ring on a finger, but as an armlet. And Ranjit Singh, on all state occasions, carries this vast diamond on his arm. And that's where the British first see it. And it starts to appear in British travel accounts. And traveller after traveller describes this extraordinary diamond on the arm of Ranjit Singh. And as the power and greed of the British grow, their interest in the Kohinoor grows with it. So that by the 1830s, it's only the Sikh kingdom which has resisted them. Everything else in India is now controlled by the East India Company. But the Sikhs, because of this brilliant army they've built, partly with Italian help, is resisting them. And it's only when Ranjit Singh dies that they can move in and start making mayhem. Now, the action speeds up at this point. We've nearly run out of time. But this is 4 people who have the Kohinoor and are killed within a year. This is a single year in the history of the Kohinoor. Karak Singh, top left, is the son of Ranjit Singh. He wears the Kohinoor on his arm, but he's hopeless. And everyone in the court knows he's a useless drunk. And so he's poisoned by his own vizier, and he dies in excruciating pain within a year. His son, now Nihal Singh, top right, inherits the Kohinoor, but he's coming back from his father's funeral. He's just burnt the body of Karak Singh, and someone shoves a huge stone from the top of an arch onto his head, and he's killed within 1 day of his father's death. The stone next goes to his mother on the bottom left, Chand Kaur, who keeps it, but she's besieged by Sher Singh on the right, and she asks Sher Singh, if I give you the Kohinoor, will you spare my life? And he says, yes, of course, and he takes the diamond. And then the next month, he pays her maidservants to pound her head to pieces with a brick when they're combing her hair. So then it goes to Sher Singh, and within a month, he's shot by 2 men in the chest. He's interested in hunting. He's a great hunter. They show, we've got these wonderful new British hunting rifles. Pow, pow. He's killed. So this all happens within 3 months. 4 owners of the Kohinoor. So you can understand perhaps the anxiety that Camilla may be feeling before she puts this on her head. But we're not finished yet. It gets worse. So all the sons of Ranjit Singh are now dead, and except one, and it's this little guy who's not even 6 years old, Dalrymple Singh. And Dalrymple Singh inherits this under the watch of his mother, who is this extraordinary figure, who's the daughter of very humble birth. Her father keeps the dogs of Ranjit Singh. He's a kennel keeper. But because she's an incredible beauty and a rock-hard, she's one of the strongest women in Indian history, she gets her son Dalrymple Singh on the throne, but the British cannot now resist. And so they use, rather like Putin using the kind of false flag attempts to invade Ukraine, the East India Company foments trouble within the Punjab, and it invades. And it pretends at first to be the friend, and it puts a regent on the throne, but then ultimately there's a second war, and this man, Lord Dalhousie, who is a completely disreputable Etonian, the 19th century version of Boris Johnson, and who, like him, is incredibly ambitious and goes from foreign secretary to a very bad prime minister. He decides to invade the Punjab, and he is employed at this stage as the Governor General of the East India Company. But he wants to be Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary. And so without consulting his own employees, the East India Company, he gives the Kohinoor to the Queen. And this is a smart move because the East India Company can't say, no, we want it back. And he gets the credit for giving it to the Queen. And indeed, he does become Foreign Secretary. So already the Kohinoor is throwing dissension around the world. But we still have to get the stone to England. So he gives it to one of his, the secretary who runs the Punjab, the governor of the Punjab, John Lawrence. And John Lawrence is a Christian evangelical. He reads the Bible all day. He couldn't care less about diamonds. And when a month later, the man from FedEx or whatever it is, the courier turns up and says, I've come to take the diamond. It's going off to Bombay to go in the sea. John Lawrence, when you lose your mobile phone or you can't find your credit card, it's one of those moments. And he's looking in all his pockets. He can't find the Kohinoor. Where did I put it? And he pulls all his clothes apart. He looks behind the sofa. He looks under the bed, under the mattress. Can't find the Kohinoor. He's lost it. Anyway, luckily it turns out that his manservant had found it in the fob pocket of his waistcoat and thought it was just a piece of glass and put it in a drawer. So eventually they find the Kohinoor, and it's sent down to Bombay under lock and key. This is it going into Ranjit Singh. And, well, we've nearly run out of time, but very quickly. It's put on board a ship, secretly, with about 5 different trunks, each within another, like Russian dolls, each with a different lock, and the maximum security you can possibly imagine. But the day after the ship leaves Bombay, cholera breaks out in the ship. And first one, then another, then a third, then a fourth sailor dies of cholera. So they try to pull into Mauritius, and Mauritius says, if you land and bring cholera to our island, we will bomb you out of the water. So they have to carry on. They then run into the biggest typhoon in the entire 19th century until there's only 1 or 2 sailors left alive strapped to the strap. This is all true. I'm not making this up. This is the most extraordinary story of horror and everything. And eventually, the Kohinoor, this poor ship called Medusa, limps with just, I think, 3 sailors left into Portsmouth. The day it arrives in British waters, the Prime Minister is riding his horse on Primrose Hill. His horse throws him and then lands on him, and the Prime Minister is killed. In the time that it takes for the Kohinoor to go from Portsmouth to London, a madman comes out of the crowd and hits Queen Victoria over the head with a stick. So that when she receives the Kohinoor that evening, she's got a black eye. So it's not looking good. It's not a promising scenario. We're running. The thing has just run out of time. I'll just quickly say that Dalrymple Singh, the little boy who inherited it, then comes back to England, and he is this beautiful child who grows into one of the most handsome of the Maharajas, and he's called to be a page at Queen Victoria's. But Queen Victoria has had a whole story. Very, very quickly, the diamond was not to Victorian taste. It was like the sort of gems you see in a medieval cathedral treasury. It was uncut, just its natural shape. And by this stage in Europe, people have got used to brilliant cut gems, which are faceted in a million ways and very symmetrical. So after they put the stone into the Great Exhibition, which is where the Kohinoor then becomes, for the first time, a household name, and the Kohinoor becomes the symbol both of the empire and of riches, and suddenly you get restaurants called the Kohinoor, pencils called the Kohinoor. It enters popular mythology. You begin to get novels about cursed diamonds. The Moonstone is written. So this is the point at which it enters the European bloodstream, and people begin to know about this diamond, and stories of cursed gems and stories of this sort of thing begin to pass around. After the Great Exhibition, when everyone has been slightly disappointed by the Kohinoor because it isn't symmetrical, they've heard about this great gem and they go and look at it and it's not shining. So despite the fact that it is flawed, in line with Indian mythology, a cursed gem is a flawed gem, they decide to cut it. And they bring out the retired Duke of Wellington, who's then aged about 90, and he makes the first cut and dies a week later. And then finally, Dalrymple Singh is standing for his portrait, and the Queen shows him the ring that's been taken from him when he was 8 years old. And he's this perfectly behaved courtier. And there's this description of Dalrymple Singh taking the stone. And there's this terrible silence. Because A, the stone is now a fraction of the size that it was. Because to cut it into symmetry, they've had to lose about 3/4 of the stone. And in terms of weight, it's no longer the biggest diamond in the world. It's actually now the 7th or 8th by this stage, because we haven't got the South African diamond mines yet. But still, it's much smaller than it used to be. And no one knows whether Dalrymple Singh is what he's going to do. He remains looking at it, hypnotized like Frodo in Lord of the Rings, and doesn't speak for 5 minutes. And then he hands it to Queen Victoria and says, my queen, take this from me, your humble servant. But of course, it is no longer him. It's a charade. It's taken by him by force, and it is now the property of Queen Victoria, who wears it rather nattily. She has a little clasp made that fits into her crown, and she can then take it off the crown and wear it around her neck, as she is doing in this picture here. So the story of the curse begins to circulate, and it becomes the tradition that it should only be worn by a queen consort or a queen, never by the king. So, but the queen, interestingly, who's died at 96 after a happy reign, never wore it. Camilla will be wearing it. And the last time it was seen in public was at the laying in state of the Queen Mother. And I had a friend who queued for 6 hours with the rest of the public to see the Queen Mother in Westminster Hall next to Parliament. And he said he finally got into the door after many hours of queuing, and the crown of the Queen Mother was on her coffin, and the light was coming in from the west window of Westminster Hall. And from 500 yards away, he could see the Kohinoor glittering in this ghostly way, lighting up the whole room, it said. He said it literally looked as if it was. So, watch this space. This story is not over. Thank you very much.
We thank you very much for this wonderful story, and also for the timing that you had. That was absolutely perfect. So thank you very much. So, siamo sicuri che questi 30 minuti passati in compagnia di maledizioni, di cui per fortuna abbiamo solo parlato senza toccare da vicino il diamante, abbiano lasciato un segno sulle vostre giornate, speriamo non definitivo. Per quello che riguarda noi, fra pochi minuti metteremo l'accento su fuochi d'artificio con Pietro Grandi, che è già lì fuori, quindi ci vediamo fra pochissimo. And back to English, thank you very much again for this 30 minutes that, of course, left a mark on our audience. Thank you. Mi sono dimenticato una cosa. È in libreria e lui